Welcome to ACC Nation. I'm Jim Quist. Our special guest is Mike Barber. Mike has been a guest on the program numerous times. If you are a sports aficionado, if you are interested in sports across the state of Virginia, the ACC, you have more than likely read something that Mike has written. And we find that every time that we have an opportunity to sit with Mike and talk sports, that we come out a lot smarter on the other end. So I have been wanting to do this, as I just told Mike a few moments ago, for quite a while. I just wanted to sit down and get a feel for what his thoughts are, his observations about how sports has been changing, in college sports specifically. And we can go back as far as you want, or just a couple of years. But let's start. And normally I would start with the NCAA and kind of work my way down, but I'm not going to do that. Sometimes the NCAA bores me. um, because of the way they operate, but we'll touch base with them a little bit, Mike. But let's start with the Atlantic Coast Conference. Things have changed quite a bit in the time that we've been covering the conference, and maybe even, well, in my case, not yours, because I know where you grew up, but when we were younger, they would be wheeling in the TVs into our schools to watch the ACC basketball tournament. But talk to us about what you've seen over the last couple of years, the things that have changed with the conference.
Yeah, I think, Jim, if you take the big picture look at kind of what's happened with the ACC, and it bleeds into every aspect of it, from the quality of the teams to the interactions with the coaches to the way they deal with media. But it all comes from the fact that the ACC was a basketball conference, right? The SEC was a football conference. And when we got to this point where we were talking about the money just growing exponentially and the TV contracts and all of that stuff, which is what controls all of this, right? It's what drives all of this change. What happened was you had one conference coming from the vantage point of, hey, we're strong in basketball. How can we keep that, get stronger there, and then see what we can do to get our football up there? And then you had another conference doing the exact same thing in the SEC, saying, hey, we're a football conference. What can we do to get bigger and stronger and make ourselves the dominant football conference? And then we'll bring along basketball. Both conferences took the exact same path. The difference was when you start with the football, you're in a much better place. So the SEC, they said, we're going to bolster football. We're not going to worry about basketball. Who cares about basketball? We're going to make football the biggest, baddest SOB on the block. And they did it. And then with all that money that poured in, where are they in basketball now? They're probably the best or one of the best conferences in basketball right now.
Yeah.
The ACC tried a similar approach, but they did it basketball first. And basketball doesn't drive the bus. So basketball didn't generate enough money. So that money didn't bring football along. And what it ended up doing was gravity, right? It ended up pulling basketball down more than it. And that's changed everything, right? It's changed everything in the way we view the ACC, the way relationships are, everything about ACC sports comes from, and I hate to say it, but it comes from the almighty dollar.
Yep. Um, I hate to point fingers, so I'm not going to ask you to go down that route. That's an option that you can exercise if you'd like. But going back to well, let's go back about 10 or 15 years when really what you just laid out there, that football is the dominant thing, and that's what's going to deliver money. And if you don't get on board, you're going to be left behind. Well, there was an obvious choice made, I think, and I know there was a lot of talk, but sometimes I felt that was lip service under John Swofford. You can only drag school presidents along so far, so that's part of the issue as well. But where did the conference fail from that standpoint of not standing back and saying, we see football as the money maker, so we really need to jump on that train?
Yeah, I think that's the moment. And it's funny, me being a newspaper guy, the newspaper industry had a similar failing, right? Everybody could see what was coming with the internet and you look at Yahoo Sports or ESPN.com. Well, newspapers had the infrastructure, the writers, the editors, the photographers to do all of that. They didn't have the vision and the foresight. So to me, where the ACC went wrong was they had a moment where they had to sit down and say, look, are we willing to give up our branding as a basketball conference because football is going to be what ultimately drives things? Now, I don't know that that was a slam dunk decision back then. Looking back, it's easy now to say, hey,
Sure.
man, like you had to go the football route. That's where the money was. Look, the NCAA tournament was a big money maker. The brand of ACC basketball was as good a sports commodity as there was. So where they failed, and I don't know that I blame John Swofford or I blame the ACC, but where they failed was not having the correct vision. It sinks lots of American businesses. They needed to look at that moment and say, look, and it was hard, right? Because Jim, think back to then, the biggest names in the room at the ACC were basketball coaches,
Yeah.
right? In the SEC was the opposite. The biggest names were the SEC football coaches. They were going to have the voice. They were going to be the ones who, when they stood up and said something, everyone's going to say, well, if that's what he says, that's what we're doing. In the ACC, those people were Dean Smith and then Roy Williams. They were Mike Krzyzewski, Jim Boeheim. Those were the voices. So the ACC was in a tough spot. It was a basketball conference. Its dominating personalities were basketball personalities, and it needed a commissioner or someone to step up in that moment and say, with all due respect, if we want this thing to be competitive, we've got to sell our soul, for lack of a better term, and go all in on football. Now, I think they did some half measures in that regard in terms of additions of places like Florida State and Miami, right? When you think about Florida State athletics, you're thinking football, you're not thinking basketball. You think about Miami, so they did some things there to, I think, really bolster the ACC football brand, but it was baby steps compared to what everybody else was doing. And the SEC and the Big Ten were starting off, to use the football term, they were starting off 30 yards downfield ahead of them. So there was no angle they were going to take to catch them. But I think they could have done some things to stay at least in the frame when you go back to watch the film.
Yeah. And well, 20 as you indicate, 2020 hindsight is a wonderful thing, and we've all got it when we look at situations like this. Um, I because of a background I have dealing with emergency management, we always have scenarios where if something happens, you go in and then you have that after, you know, meeting where you chew on things. Has that ever occurred with the ACC, to your knowledge, that they sat around and said, "Hey, we can learn from this. We made a mistake here, but we can be better about it going down the road."
Yeah, I don't know that there's ever been a formal reflection, and I laugh because you hope that that meeting isn't an autopsy, right? I mean, look at the Pac-12. You hope it's not a bunch of guys sitting around in a room when the ACC's dead and gone, saying, "Well, geez, what could we have done to avoid this fate?" Look, a lot of what they've done in recent years has been reactive. It's been sticking your finger in a hole in the dam because the water was coming out, and then it pops out another, and you stick another finger in there. And on the one hand, that's not going to get you out of the problem. On the other hand, you have to do it, right? I mean, you think about some of the things they did with a TV contract that now they say, oh, we're saddled with this TV contract that doesn't pay us enough. Well, at the time, it brought stability. They had to do it in the moment. Now, does it look good? Well, probably not. But that's a bubble that may burst here, and things may end up being a little more even there down the road. You're in an odd time in college sports where nobody foresaw NIL overtaking facilities and coaches' salaries for where you needed money. So as everybody was mapping this out, they were thinking, how can I pay my biggest commodities, my coaches? But how can I make sure that I still have the nicest arena and the nicest weight room? And then out of left field, here comes NIL and it says, don't worry about your coaches. And you can go back to lifting in an old gym. You've got to pay cold hard cash to these guys. So that model kind of flipped on its head. Look, there's a million places looking back where you can think, okay, the ACC should have gone all in on football. Look, the ACC shouldn't have signed the contract they signed. I think in the moment, those moves made sense. I feel that way about Cal, Stanford, and SMU. Okay, what value do people want to break down? What value do they add? Hey, it's about stability. It's about if something happened and Florida State and Clemson left, are you still a viable conference? Do I think that SMU, Cal, and Stanford make sense in the ACC? No. Do I think they add any tremendous value? I don't buy the market, the TV market stuff. I think wherever you are in the country with streaming, with the way everything is, you can watch whatever you want. I don't buy any of that. But what those teams brought was stability. So I think that was a shrewd move. Now, 10 years down the line, when they're splitting up a TV contract more ways, I might say, geez, probably a mistake to bring in those teams and have to share that money. It feels like the ACC and everybody is trying to hit a moving target. And the SEC and the Big Ten, because they have football money, they've got more arrows. And so they're going to hit the target more. And the ACC, with their basketball money, they have less arrows. And I don't know that they've shot them true. I don't know that they've struck many bullseyes, if we want to stick with that analogy. But I don't know that I can look at a point and say, geez, where were you shooting? Where were you aiming? I just think I think they're behind the eight ball because of the money. I think it's a moving target. I think NIL kind of blindsided everybody, and it will be fascinating to see in this next round of TV contracts if what I'm expecting, which is the TV contract bubble to burst and everybody to get a less lucrative deal, and now all of a sudden these schools that are committed to facilities that they're already in the process of building, they're committed to 8-year contracts with these coaches. Where are they going to find the money? And the ACC may find itself backing into a little more success because they didn't have the money to commit to these things. It's going to be a fascinating next decade. And you certainly hope that when the decade's over, we're evaluating the ACC and not, again, performing a post-mortem of sorts.
It's nice to hear you say what you just did about the bubble potentially bursting, because quite honestly, I keep sitting down and looking at things. That's all I see. I don't know how they can continue to go this route, and I think that maybe the conference is in a lot better position, but only time will tell. Now, this is where I get into the NCAA, because we just opened the door here. Did the NCAA drop the ball on their end by being the micromanagers that they are? And let's we could argue that all day and night. I know you've dealt with them too, but every time I deal with the NCAA, it's micromanagement to a T. Very helpful people, very structured, everything, but micromanagement is a recipe for disaster. And it seems to me like that micromanagement delivered up a really big plate of something nobody wants to have. But when it comes down to the athletes being paid, NIL, et cetera, and it's just run amok. What is your viewpoint on that, on what the NCAA did or did not do?
Yeah, I always tend to give them the benefit of the doubt that their hearts were in the right place.
You're a nice guy. That's all I
Right.
can say.
I think their hearts are in the right place. I just think they're hopelessly misguided. And it reminds me of, was it the 70s with the song Hold On Loosely, but
Yeah.
Don't Let Go? Well, they have not held on loosely. They've held on tightly, to your point, micromagic, too tightly. And they ended up never stepping back to say, hey, geez, this thing's going to get away from us entirely if we don't give a little slack on the line here. That's what happened, right? Everybody knew this was coming eventually. Players were going to get paid in some way, shape, or form. And the NCAA, instead of getting out in front of this thing and saying, all right, well let's start. 20 years ago, they should have started revenue sharing. In which case, the drive to challenge them in court probably isn't there, right? If you're getting a big chunk of the money and you want to go back and say it should be, it's just I don't believe anybody, whether it was O'Bannon or any of these cases that started, I don't think they wanted to take down the NCAA, right? Like if the NCAA had been a little bit more forward thinking and a little more open to some change, I don't think we would have seen this huge change. What happened was the NCAA said, you get nothing. And then the players said, well, we kind of feel like we're entitled to everything. And then there was that moment where, hey, let's meet in the middle. And the NCAA didn't budge. And guess what? Now the NCAA is on the way out because they didn't budge. I mean, the Supreme Court told them, and I know the Supreme Court has changed it, but the Supreme Court told them anytime you end up here with a challenge, you're going to lose. We've looked at your model. We don't think it's right. It's in violation of multiple constitutional issues. There's multiple issues here. Every time you come before us, you're going to lose. Every judge in America knows that. No judge wants to get overturned on appeal. So there's nowhere for the NCAA to go to say, we're going to do this, because anything they do, any bit of micromanagement now, an athlete's going to say, well, I challenge that. And they're going to file a lawsuit. And the NCAA is going to go into their big boardroom and say, what are our odds of winning? And their lawyer, it's going to take him a few days because he wants the billable hours. But when he's done cashing in the billable hours, he's going to say, you can't win. And then they're going to fold, and they're going to go over and over and over. If the NCAA 20 years ago had said, hey, let's come up with a revenue sharing model, it could have been less dramatic than what we're going to get in this settlement. And I don't know when the House settlement, if it's going to be exactly what we've seen or if that's going to change. But whatever it is going to be far more drastic than what the NCAA could have gotten away with if they had played ball 20 years ago.
Is there a future for the NCAA? Based upon what you just laid out there, it almost sounds like they're digging the hole and they're throwing the dirt on top of themselves.
Well, I think their horrible position. I don't know if you play poker, but when you're the short stack, right? When you're the short stack, you can't really do much other than hope to find a winning hand. And I think that's the NCAA right now. I think they're the short stack. They're hoping that they don't lose everything in blinds as it goes around the table. But I think what's going to happen ultimately is the schools and the Power Four conferences are going to drive this. They're going to say, look, we don't want any of your rules. We don't want any of your, we're going to give you the rules, but you're welcome to be the governing body that enforces them. There are rules. We can change them. We can decide how they work. We're going to, as the presidents right now, hire the president of the NCAA, all that. So I think there's a place for the NCAA to be there. It's just going to be a neutered version of the NCAA. I wrote an article a couple months ago, I guess, and it was about tampering, about guys who are not in the transfer portal and schools reaching out to them and saying, hey, get in the portal. We can get you $200,000. You can come to our school. Coaches are going crazy over it, right? I mean, they're not in, the kids who are happy where they're at, and then they're hearing, oh, come to. And I asked Jim Phillips, the commissioner of the ACC, I said, Jim, what do you do about this? He said, well, one, we encourage our coaches to bring forward any evidence of this. Um, but there's never evidence, right? They use these disappearing TikTok and Snapchat messages. So you get a message, but 30 seconds later it's gone. And so there's no evidence. And then if there was, what can the NCAA really do? Right? They've neutered the NCAA. And this was Jim Phillips' point. Colleges and athletes and these lawsuits have neutered the NCAA. For better or worse, that's where we're at. The NCAA has no power, no ability to enforce anything. So what is the point of coming? So they need to come up with the rules that they're happy with. And then, hey, look, the NCAA is already there. They got a nice building in Indianapolis. It's right there with the water. It's a very beautiful. Hey, keep the NCAA, so to speak, but they're going to rewrite the rules, and the NCAA isn't going to have any power per se, other than to be the bureaucracy that enforces things, which is what they're supposed to be. And again, they've just held on too tightly to thinking they're more than that.
Power and greed, man, they go hand in hand. Let's go back into the conference and talk about how, and this can apply to really any of the sports in the ACC, because there have been coaches who have been in any number of sports for 15, 20, 25 years. And all of a sudden, gone. And I mean, it's just almost across the board. You're seeing all of these people disappearing, myriad reasons. Tell us what you're seeing, what you're hearing, and what you think is occurring.
Right, well, there's two things. There's a natural occurrence, like Mike Krzyzewski retiring. Mike Krzyzewski coached a long time. Roy Williams retiring. He coached a long time. Even Jim Larrañaga retiring. But he's going to be our pivot point here, because Jim Larrañaga retiring, not really surprising or newsworthy. Jim Larrañaga up and quitting in the middle of the season out of frustration, which is really what it is. Mm-hmm. That's where you're seeing the change. And that's the second camp. And that's your Jay Wright at Villanova, your Tony Bennett here. I live in Charlottesville. Your Tony Bennett here at UVA. It's guys looking at this model and saying, look, I don't want to do this, right? It's not I'm old. It's not it's not the game has passed me by, right? It's not I don't want to teach kids how to play basketball. It's I don't want to call agents. I don't want to do the other stuff. I don't want to start over every year. I don't want to develop players so that they can go somewhere else once I've got them ready to contribute. Um, Look, is it the worst model ever? I don't know that it's the worst model, but is it dramatically different from what we've sold for the last 100 years? Yeah, it is. And especially if you're a guy like Tony Bennett, right? Tony Bennett prides himself on come here, stay with me for 3 or 4 years. I'm going to make you a better basketball player. I'm going to make you an NBA ready defender. I had a scout one time. We were walking into a gym. I think we were walking in at Boston College. It was UVA Boston College, and we were talking about Ryan Dunn, who's been really successful in the NBA. And we were talking about Ryan, and I said, yeah, I said, he's not shooting the ball. I said, how much is that a concern? And the scout told me, look, no scout is getting fired for drafting a UVA player because they're going to be NBA ready defensively. So if I use my pick on a UVA player, I'm not saying, the number one pick in the draft, but where
Sure.
UVA guys usually go, somewhere in that, mid to late first round, early second, you use your pick, you're going to give your team a guy that your coach is going to be able to play valuable minutes in the NBA. Now, if he develops into a good offensive player, Malcolm Brogdon, Ryan Dunn's already started doing it, all of a sudden you've got a home run, right? And you're getting a big fat Christmas bonus. But if he never develops offensively, you didn't waste your pick because he can play NBA defense. Tony Bennett prided himself on that kind of development of getting guys. Look at Caden Shedrick and what he's been able to do at Texas. Tony Bennett develops Caden Shedrick. Now we're in a new era, and Caden Shedrick leaves once he's developed. I think there was a frustration there for Tony. I think there's a frustration for a guy like Jim Larinaga when you have players, and look, it plays both ways at Miami, right? They bring in a lot of guys with NIL money, but you have guys that you expect back. It was the unpredictableness. I've said this to so many people, but I think 10 years from now, if Tony Bennett is up for it, he can come back and coach again. Once they've got this stuff hammered out and you know the rules, hey, you tell Tony Bennett the rules and he's going to go produce a winning basketball team. I believe that. Look, I'm a big Tony Bennett fan. I'm a big believer in him and what he does. But uh, I think what pushed him out was the question of what are the rules? What are we doing? How do I know who's on my roster? I think Tony Bennett would love to see them go the NBA way. Hey, give us a salary cap. Let me know what I'm working with. I'll sign some guys to a 3 year deal, some guys to a 2 year deal. And if there's a hole or two, maybe I'll pay somebody for 1 year. It's the instability, the not knowing. Um, and that's what's driving a lot of these coaches, particularly on the basketball side, out of it. And I get it. But if you're talking about what we go back to the beginning, the ACC basketball forward league, well, that's where they're losing their personalities. Mike Roy retiring, Jim walking away, Tony walking away. So I think it's hurt the ACC more than other leagues because those guys looked at it and said, I don't need this.
What was your impression? We'll start with Tony first because you're closer to that program and more familiar with him, but also Jim Larinaga. Well, what went through your mind when you heard these two guys depart when they did?
Yeah, Tony was shocking. Um, I had been laid off by the Times Dispatch not long before that. And I had been keeping kind of busy with freelancing. And the day Tony resigned was actually the first day I said, you know what? It's over. I'm not a sports writer anymore. I'm going to restart. I said, I'm going to take my golf clubs out. I'm going to go to the driving range. I'm going to hit some golf balls and enjoy my day. And tomorrow I'm going to go look for a grown-up job, whatever it is. I'll be a greeter at Walmart. Whatever I'm doing next, we'll start that tomorrow. And I took my clubs out and I cleaned them. And I went out to the driving range and I bought a jumbo bucket. And the guy behind the counter said, hey, if you haven't swung them in a while, you might not want to hit a jumbo bucket. I said, no, it'll be fine. And I put a ball on the tee and I hit it. I actually hit it all right. And I heard my phone buzzing. I said, oh, well, I hit a couple more balls and the phone just buzzing and buzzing and buzzing. And I have young kids. So when your phone rings, you kind of have to check it just in case. And,
Yeah.
so I look at it, it's not school. So, okay. But I'm like, it's a bunch of people I know in college basketball. Why are they all calling me? So finally I picked up once and played a couple. I said, oh my gosh, Tony Bennett is going to announce that he's going to resign. And, it was shocking to me to hear that. until you kind of play it through in your mind and you think, one, yeah, I could see this not being for Tony, this Wild West system of NIL and roster and predictability and just the pressure he'd been under because they hadn't gotten results in the postseason in recent years. So all of that makes sense timing wise. A little shocking, right? How close to the season, but if you look at the way his dad left both times, Wisconsin and Washington State, you leave that close to the season, it guarantees that one of your assistants gets a shot. Um, Now we can argue whether or not he did Ron Sanchez a favor or not with that setup, but because I think what Tony had put together was a 2-year rebuild. And I don't know that Ron's going to get to see year two of that, which isn't really fair in terms of how the roster was built. But I was stunned that Tony Bennett resigned. But when I go back and think of the reasons, and when I went to his press conference, obviously, and covered that for the pilot, and everything he said, you kind of sit there nodding, and you went, yeah, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah. How about Larinaga? How did that strike you?
So I've known Jim for a while because he was at Mason when I was covering JMU. Uh, that stunned me just because I thought there was a good chance that Jim was going to retire after last season.
Mhm.
And then when he didn't, I thought he was going to retire after this season. I thought he had just gotten to that point where he'd had some great teams. I think everybody thought this was a pretty good Miami roster. So I really got the vibe like, and I only talked to him a few times in the offseason, but it was, hey, I'm going to come back and have a one more great year. Who knows? Maybe put together a magic run, the Final Four kind of thing, and then that'll be it. And instead, it was like the season started going south. He's got to start thinking to himself, hey, do I have the gas in the tank to come back for another year and try to rebuild this thing again? Well, if I do, I don't know who my players are. And I think he more than threw the hands in the air and said, "I forget it. I'm out of here." Again, the timing shocking, but the decision not really surprising.
Um, yeah, yeah, I looking back on that, um, totally agree with what your observation there. It was shocking for me the moment that I heard it. I was sort of like, what is going on here? This is a sign of something more, and or maybe there's something more going on in Miami than meets the eye. Um, with NIL and transfer portal, are we in danger, especially with the things going on with the NCAA as we talked about? Are we in danger of losing Olympic style sports at our colleges?
It's going to be interesting to see, right? Because if you're telling me that you need all this money, can you justify sports that don't produce revenue? Now, that's never been the model, and that's been the thing that we're supposed to love about the NCAA, right? Is it doesn't matter if your varsity crew team brings in money. That's a good thing to have. That's an Olympic sport. You produce athletes, and it has all of the other benefits that we talk about from athletics. It's a fascinating question of do they have a future? And I'm not talking about like, oh, maybe baseball can find a way to make a little more money. I'm talking about like the true sports that, look, not to be disrespectful, but like nobody's paying to go see. That's not on the horizon. They're not going to have a TV deal. And look, the ACC network can show highlights all they want until they're blue in the face. It wasn't going to change those sports into revenue sports. Title IX obviously plays a factor, right? You can't just say, well, we're going to get rid of because now you're in violation of Title IX, at least the way it's been interpreted in the past. Again, you have a new Supreme Court, a different mindset. You could see a totally different interpretation to the way we've grown up interpreting Title IX. But assuming that that stays the law of the land, so to speak, there's a limit to what you can do on the women's side. And then on the men's side, you get down to a point where there's some sports where how much are they really costing you? I think what I've always envisioned is a move back to conferences that are geographic, that are regional, that just make sense. And you pull football out of this thing, right? You pull football out. Say, okay, look, SMU and Stanford and Cal are in the ACC football league. Sure. But that doesn't mean that your field hockey team has to fly out to Cal on a Thursday night for a conference. You got to get back to, the old ECAC volleyball and wrestling. You got to get into conferences, and that was what will make those sports sustainable. And look, there's great rivalries there. There's great potential there when you're talking about Richmond lacrosse and UVA lacrosse. Should Richmond football and UVA football be in the same league? Well, the way Virginia's been, maybe that's a bad example, but you know my point.
Right.
Should you take a Power Four football team and put them against an FC? No, that's not how you make a league. But Richmond basketball, very competitive, right? Richmond lacrosse, you can form leagues that are logical, geographical. They're going to hold down costs, and they're going to help Olympic sports and other sports sustain themselves without getting caught up in football. And that to me is the easy fix. And I've never quite understood the reluctance. I mean, I know there's leagues out there that don't have football, right? You say, well, what happens to the Big East and things like that? Uh, and that's legitimate. And those are problems. But I think when you talk about it, that disparity's there already, right? SEC basketball teams get more money from SEC football. The Big East doesn't have it. They get their money only from basketball. That disparity's there. So let's pull football out of this thing and see if we can't get back to geographic leagues, regional rivalries, lower the costs, and get back to saying, okay, Olympic sports are part of the college experience, and they don't have to be viewed through the same lens as the billion-dollar industry that is college football.
I I think that's a grand idea. Now, whether it's a reality or
Yeah,
if it's just being idealistic,
I don't know that it's a reality. I love the idea, but I don't know if any of your listeners watched what was it, the Avenger movies, and they had a character who he had this like gem in his head, and his wires were all entwined with it, and that's what it feels like. Like, how do you pick this thing apart, wire by wire, bit by bit, to extract football? It probably doesn't work. It's like we always talked about with pro sports and contracts when they were starting to get really out of control, and not picking because he was a great player, but Ryan Sandberg, I remember when he signed that huge deal, and it became, oh, what was going on with salaries? And people said, well, what if you taxed pro sports at a higher level, an entertainment tax, that kind of thing. And you see it in small towns with summer baseball. What if you had that? But the cat was out of the bag, right? You're not going to go back and tell them now, hey, we're going to do it. Was too late. And I fear for college that I've got a million great solutions, but we're too far down the road, right? Everybody's got great ideas, but they're not, you can't enact them because it's too complicated.
never too late to put the brakes on in a vehicle, especially when you see a bad curve coming up and there's ice on the road. Um, let's talk a little bit about sports media and how that's changed because you've seen that firsthand. Um, and the fact that here we are right now doing it this way, um, being seen on YouTube and streaming radio and podcasts and gosh, being live on multiple social media platforms. Um, what exactly is going on? I mean, we you touched on it briefly about not seeing or not having the vision to make the changes, but what is going on and where do you see sports media headed? Because it seems like every week to me, I'm reading something about another organization or people and it's upsetting because there are people like yourself who I think the world of, and when I see that impacting you and other people, I worry.
Yeah, and rightfully so. And I think there's two problems. And I think not to go, too far down this rabbit hole, but I think in this country, not just sports, but journalism in general, media in general, I don't think the average American is an intelligent consumer of media these days. I don't think they can discern good journalism from not good journalism. I don't think they can discern unbiased news from, propaganda. I don't think they have learned that coming up. When I was a kid, it was easier because there were fewer sources, right? Like your local newspaper was the source for local news.
Right.
And somewhere along the way, we got skewed with the whole, the whole idea of you got to present both sides. And so, you say my name's Mike Barber and I say my name's Mickey Mouse. Well, I got a birth certificate. We can back up that my name is Mike Barber. You don't have to give even sides to nonsense, but we got down that path. And look, again, I don't want to go too far down that path, but that's skewed into sports coverage where people didn't understand the difference. And because they didn't understand the difference, they weren't willing to pay for legitimate news. Well, legitimate news is guys who are on the road. They're with the team. They're traveling. They're there. They know these coaches, these players. There's a lot of great sites that are fan sites, and they aggregate stuff, right? If I write something, if I tweet, hey, so and so is going to be out for the game. Coach told me his ankle's not responding to treatment. I tweet it. Within minutes of me tweeting it, these websites all have articles that say Mike Barber has written this, and then what does it mean? And it's an intelligent, it's a good post, right? There's nothing wrong with it. But a lot of people say, well, I don't need to go pay for the news reporter because I'm going to get it for free when it gets aggregated on these sites. And what everybody's losing here is when you lay off all the real reporters, there's nothing left to aggregate, right? There's going to be nowhere to get that first nugget of, hey, I broke the news. Maybe you don't subscribe to me, maybe you subscribe to another paper. But if you're just waiting for it to trickle down, well, if you cut off the spout at the top, there's no trickle down. And what you're left with is a bunch of people who, are sitting at home watching the game and they might be bringing really intelligent analysis, but you're not going to have the real information that it all starts with. And again, it goes back to being an intelligent consumer. There's a place for both of those models, but people don't see a value right now. It's the bottom line. People do not see a value right now in real journalism. And if they don't see a value in it, they're not going to pay for it.
Jen.
The industry did a ton of things wrong. Look, the industry did a ton of things wrong, hurt itself. But the bottom line is the average American consumer doesn't see a value in, I mean, it's mainstream media. They get called the fake news. There's a whole sense of, and that's what's happened is people aren't willing to pay for the real deal. And newspapers are owned by horrible companies, right? Most newspapers are owned by horrible companies. And they say, look, if people don't care, then why don't I just get an AI or a kid 1 year out of college? Doesn't matter if he has any contacts or let's just do, and we can save money. And that only adds to it because then the people who were still hanging on and who still did see the difference, now they're getting a product that doesn't have that value. So the industry has played into its demise, no doubt. But I think that the decline in the average appreciation of consumers, of Americans' ability to value journalism has really gone down.
Totally agree with that. I've worked in radio and television for well 50 years. So how about that? Not continuously, but enough that what you're saying is very accurate. Is the you know if I were to take 5 companies I worked for, one, maybe 2 were good, solid companies to work for. The others, no. And did they appreciate journalists, how important news was, and having that reputation in the community? One or 2, yes. The rest did not. And I've just seen that perpetuate itself over the years to the degree that I see with, newspaper has really taken the fall in a bad way. And I've still got a lot of friends who work in newspaper, but also have a lot of friends who are still in radio and television. And man, are they, I'm hearing the same thing. It's staggering and it's scary. And I think you're right too about from the standpoint of people not appreciating just how important journalists and somebody can say, well, Mike is just a sports reporter. No, he's not. Trust me. You read his product, you see the time and effort that he puts into things and the relationships that everything that has to go into being a solid journalist is what Mike is doing and other people are doing. And when you lose that, as Mike points out, it's gone. Chances are you're never going to get it back. It scares the hell out of me, to be honest with you, and I'm sure it does you because you're in it. I'm retired, so
Yeah, I'm moving closer to that. But yeah, no, you're right. It's a question of how do you get it back? Because if a consumer if consumer doesn't know the difference, then these companies that own newspapers, they have no impetus to do a great job. It's a fascinating industry. Jim, you'll get this because it's one of the few industries where the workers are going to care infinitely more than the owners, right? If you own Jim's Landscaping, you can have great employees, but nobody cares more than Jim because his name's on the side of the truck. If I own Mike's Bakery, I can have the best employees in the world, but nobody's going to care more than Mike because it's Mike's Bakery. You get to the newspaper and nobody cares less than the owners. They don't, but nobody cares more than the guys at the bottom because they're the ones putting their name and doing that work and they've got that passion. And that's the killer, I think, when you walk around what's left of these newsrooms is you have people in there who still believe passionately about what they're doing and they just don't get any support. They don't get it from the companies that own them. They don't get it from the average reader. And look, I had some great readers, so I don't want this to sound wrong. And when I got laid off, I heard from so many people, and it was really uplifting. But overall, the market isn't there. The appreciation for that work isn't there. And I'm not even talking about the extreme. You look at political reporters today and going places of being called fake news and being threatened. That's off the spectrum. But I just mean the average reporter in his hometown, and he's doing a story about why his local municipality had to pay so much to repair fire hydrants, just an example, right? And people say, I don't know. What does he know? I don't trust him more than I trusted the guy I was talking to down at the shoe shine stand. Well, you should, right? And we used to, as a country, we used to believe in journalists. And look, journalists aren't blameless in all of this, certainly, but disproportionately, it's just we need journalists, and the companies that own these papers, they're not as invested in it as the people, the boots on the ground.
Yeah, it is, and let me just say this is that the people who are in media, whether it's print or broadcast or any other, who really care, it is an art. It truly is an art, and there's a passion there that I can't even begin to describe because unless you live it, it's if you're working in a job where you absolutely, like you said, the people who may be on the bottom tier, they're proud of what they do, and there's just they want to do the best because they're the outward face of that company or that newspaper or that radio station. It's not the bosses, it's them. They're the ones that people look to and go, oh, that's the guy with, or that's the guy who does the whatever. Yeah, man.
And Jim, I'll tell you, because I got young kids, this generation doesn't appreciate journalism. It is what it is. They don't appreciate it. There is going to be a point where they wish they had, because, and I'm not even talking the scary stuff, government corruption, all that, which is incredibly important. I'm talking about what I do, right? Sports writing maybe doesn't seem that important. I don't know how many times my kids have said to me like, "Oh, what happened with this? What's that? What's this picture from?" And I go up and what do? I go on Google just like everybody else, but I'm looking for a newspaper article on, what did Carl Lewis do at the Olympics? Well, now the people of this upcoming generation, 2020 through 2030, say, I don't know how many sources they're going to find reliable, preservable. We used to say the paper of record, right?
Right.
So many communities are losing paper of record. So you want to say to your kids, well, when I was your age, we had a Christmas parade, and one year, some famous movie star came and and you say, I can't remember who it was. You want to look it up? Well, there's no paper of record for your little town anymore because it got swallowed up. That information is gone. And it's American history. It's not the American history that's in your history book. It's the American history that matters to you and me on the street every day, right? And I'm not saying like the Constitution doesn't matter. That stuff matters. But I'm saying
Sure.
the life we live is preserved by journalists and by journalism. And a whole generation doesn't care and is losing it. And I think 20, 30, 40 years from now, they're going to see the error of their ways. But it would be like if you threw out your photo album, you can regret it, but it ain't coming back.
That's right. That's right. That's a very, very good point because yeah, it's all the little things in your life, the things that you touch on that touch on you that you may not think of on a daily basis. However, just like you said, hey, who was that star that came to town for that Christmas parade? And good example, and this will tell you how old I am. Um, Harry Truman actually came to the city I grew up in, and I was merely a baby, but my dad served in World War II and the Korean War, and I don't know how he did this, but he placed me in Truman's hands. Truman held me in his hands going up the road in this little town for a couple of moments. That's my claim to fame, being close to a president. But those are the sort of things that you tell that story, and it's like, well, prove it. I
Right.
okay. Anyway,
Yeah. It's
uh,
you lose when you lose papers of record and you lose responsible journalism, especially at the community level. Look, we're never going to stop covering Congress and the president. It's too important. But when you lose that at the community level, you lose something that is irreplaceable, I think.
yeah, I agree, and sometimes I think the coverage of local government is far more important at times because of what it can really mean. I've seen enough of that and covered enough news in my lifetime to understand that. Um, Social media. And we've just sort of touched on this a little bit already, but uh, you know how does social media impact sports coverage these days? And is it a valid source, or is it what we have been alluding to? Uh, mm,
It's a combination, right? Because the great thing that social media does is it connects people with athletes, with coaches directly when the athletes and coaches want. Right. You know, it's not the access that I get. If you lose a hard game and you're sitting in the locker room and you don't want to talk to anybody, you still have to talk to me. So that's the way sports works. You don't have to tweet in that moment, but it does a great job of connecting and personalizing athletes with fans. I love that about social media. Like I love the fact that you don't have to wait for me to tell you what your star player's favorite restaurant is. He might tweet it or he might Instagram a picture of himself there. Like, does it make my job harder? Sure. There's details that are already out there. I've got to find new angles. I got to be more creative. Okay, bring it on, baby. I'll do that. I love that challenge. I love that part of social media that you really personalize athletes, coaches. You have that connection. It can be there. Now, the bad part of social media, we've all seen it, is anybody can sit behind a keyboard anonymously. Who knows where they are and say horrible things, right? And I'm not talking about to journalists because that is what it is, but I'm talking about athletes, right? I'm talking about you miss a 3-point shot and your team doesn't cover the spread, and all of a sudden you've got gamblers, in your mentions threatening you. And I've talked to enough people in college. That was really the big concern with legalized sports gambling. It wasn't the gambling, it was the social media and the threats and the duress that these kids are going to be under. So the negative ultimately, unfortunately, as is the case with many things in society, has overtaken, I think, the positive. But there's a lot of positive there. I mean, look, just in the world image, I mean, we see, revolutions across the ocean and we watch it unfold on Twitter, right? People, or X now, but people giving firsthand, and it eliminates the ability of governments to block that information. So, oh, well, let's sanitize this before it goes. You got boots on the ground, and you don't have to be a journalist to take a video, or to take a picture. It's not going to be as good as professional photography, but to give us the inside look at that. And I think there's a tremendous value in that. So I don't hate social media. I hate a lot of the people on it and how they use it, and the negativity. But I think social media can be a good thing if we could get back to a sane place in society.
um, I've got a question for you. We'll just get off track here for just a few moments, which I'm known to do quite often. You've seen and heard it before. Before we started recording, we were talking about your collection of bourbon. Um, Tell me what your favorite bourbon is.
So my favorite bourbon in the entire world, and I have one bottle of it, and I can't find the right time to open it, is Michter's, which is a distillery in Kentucky,
Mhm.
and Michter's does a sour mash, which is a very good bourbon, and it's my house bourbon. It's what I would drink, just casually. In 2019 and 2022, they did a toasted barrel version of this sour mash. There are very few bottles left on earth. When you go to Michter's in Kentucky, you can't buy it. I went out there and they were like, "Good luck. If you find a bottle, let us know." Uh, my buddy, who is a serious bourbon collector, won a bottle for me at auction, um, which we paid hundreds of dollars over MSRP, but these bottles are rare. It is to me that the best. And I'm a bourbon guy. I've got probably 50 bottles sitting right over my laptop here, staring at me in the face. Uh, but to me, it's my favorite bourbon I've ever tasted.
Is that M? How is that spelled?
So it's Michter apostrophe S,
Got it.
Michter's. And they do some other brands that you might know, Bombergers and Shanks. It was really, the name was born out of a Pennsylvania distillery. And then this company kind of rebooted it in Kentucky, post-prohibition, obviously, where a lot of these companies came back to life or didn't come back to life, depending on their positioning. But yeah, it's my favorite distillery, and that particular bottle is my favorite bottle.
Well, my sister-in-law lives in Louisville, and she is a bourbon aficionado and finds some way to get into bottles that nobody else seems to be able to find. So I'm going to put this on her list,
Please do, and she will not be disappointed.
and
Uh, let's
if I can pull up a bottle through her, then it's going to be on. It's going to be my treat.
Well, let me know.
Just for
But
all the time that you've spent with us over the years and shared things with us and talked with us, because it's be more than our pleasure to share that and to just to maybe the next time we get you on to watch you pour one and actually enjoy it.
there you go. Though we should really pour it together so you can try it too.
Well, yeah, I've got a few a few of my own here. If I find two, well, if I find one, it's going to you. But if I find two, I'll grab that too.
That sounds like a great deal for me.
That can't go wrong there. I've got a variety down here with the names of my sister-in-law, my father-in-law, who is big into bourbon, so she's always picking something up for him, et cetera, and so it just sort of bleeds over into the entire family.
I get it.
Which is not a bad thing. One last thought here. Where you see the ACC in the next couple of years?
Yeah, look, I think for the last couple of years, there's been a narrative in the national media that ACC basketball was down, right? And I think it was unfair. I don't think it was true. This year, it's true, Jim. Like, they're down. It's bad. I did a tweet a couple of weeks ago, maybe last week, and I don't know the updated numbers, but half of the league was at 500 or below.
Yeah.
There was no other Power Four conference that had more than one team with a losing record, and the ACC had half of its league there. It's just there are too many games on the ACC schedule that hurt you when you play them right now. It used to be the argument, look, you can get smoothed up by Duke and Carolina because you got a bunch of good games left on your schedule that you can win, but they're quality opponents.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have that now. You've got Duke. They're on their kind of their own thing right now. You've got Clemson, you've got Pitt, you've got Wake. I think Louisville's really good. I think Carolina can still get there, but I don't believe in this particular team. That's it, really. Who else are you beating? If you beat Pitt at Pitt, there's some quality there. There's some teams that have been good at home, but overall, this league is not good. Beating them home or away doesn't help you. Playing some of these teams hurts you when you're thinking about net rankings and strength of schedule. So the ACC has to turn that around, right? They need to turn that around in a big way. Look, the biggest thing the ACC did this year, and it was vital, Jim, was getting two teams in the college football playoff. And we can argue about whether it was right, and we can argue about the way they got there, and we can argue about which teams it was, but they had to, absolutely had to legitimize themselves on the football front. If the ACC wants to get out of this mess, it's football forward. Football's got to drag them out of this mess. Now, do I love their odds of that? No, not particularly, but that's what's got to happen. And Florida State, maybe they've been humbled now, right? They were rattling their sword, how terrible the ACC was. Now they're garbage. Maybe they've been humbled and they can come back and help lead the ACC somewhere great. Miami had a good year. Still, Miami kind of gacked away some stuff they needed. You're going to need those brands, Virginia Tech, Clemson, to carry this thing football wise to being two teams in the playoff every year, maybe a third team, and that's what's going to generate the revenue. And then you can lift up basketball and you can get this thing going. But man, it's an uphill climb.
That it is. Mike Barber, thank you very much for coming on and spending a little bit of time talking. I like I said, I've been wanting to have you on for a long time just to do this, just to sit down and chat a little bit about different things. And as always, you give everyone who's listening a great perspective on what's happening across sports, why it's important, and it's just always fabulous to talk with you, my friend. Look forward to doing it again, hopefully sometime soon, and that we have something really exciting to talk about. So, I'm crossing my fingers on a couple of things there. So
that would be great. And this has been a lot of fun, Jim. I appreciate. Thanks for having me on again.
Certainly. Take care.
Thanks for listening to ACC Nation. Be sure to listen, like and subscribe to our podcast, radio, and YouTube channels by visiting accnation.net. Follow us on Instagram, X, Facebook, Mastodon, Threads, Blue Sky and Reddit at ACC Nation.
ACC Nation.